What happens when a bold woman challenges an industry built on exclusivity and ego? Gabrielle Carter, a visionary leader, steps into the luxury auto world to shatter stereotypes, confront betrayal, and redefine success, not just for herself, but for everyone who's ever been told they don't belong. Before we dive in, let us know. What time are you listening to this, and where are you? Drop a comment below. We'd love to hear from you. The early spring sun bathed Rodeo Drive in a warm glow, its golden rays bouncing off the glass storefronts of high-end boutiques and luxury showrooms. The air was filled with soft classical music spilling out from open doorways, mingling with the hum of high-end cars rolling along the pristine street. Pedestrians, many dressed in designer clothing, moved leisurely, carrying shopping bags or stopping to admire window displays. Among them, a woman with understated attire walked toward a gleaming showroom that housed some of the world's most sought-after luxury cars. Gabrielle Carter adjusted the strap of her canvas tote bag as she approached the glass entrance. Her denim jacket, faded jeans, and white sneakers made her stand out against the opulence surrounding her. Yet her posture remained poised and her gaze steady. To any passerby, she appeared to be just another curious visitor, but Gabrielle had a purpose beyond admiration or casual interest. Stepping inside, she took a moment to let her eyes adjust to the interior, which was all sleek surfaces and modern design. Cars worth hundreds of thousands of dollars were displayed on polished platforms under soft, flattering lighting. The faint scent of leather mixed with a hint of fresh espresso lingered in the air, suggesting that even the aroma was carefully curated to enhance the experience. Gabrielle let her gaze sweep across the room, observing more than the cars. She noted how the sales associates interacted with customers. Polite smiles, attentive nods, and rehearsed lines delivered with precision. Her footsteps were soft against the tiled floor as she approached a vivid red sports car. It was an impressive machine, all sharp angles and raw power, yet elegant in its design. Before she could examine it further, a subtle shift in the air caught her attention. She glanced up to see a man in a tailored suit standing near the counter. His gaze had settled on her, a flicker of disapproval visible in his narrowed eyes. The name tag pinned neatly to his lapel read, "Peter Sullivan." Peter leaned slightly toward another associate, his voice low but not low enough to avoid being overheard. "She doesn't look like the kind of person who'd buy anything here," he said, his tone laced with amusement. The younger associate hesitated, shifting awkwardly before giving a polite nod. Gabrielle pretended not to notice, but inwardly she felt a familiar pang. It wasn't the first time she had been underestimated based on appearances. Still, she had learned long ago how to let such moments slide off her back, at least for the time being. The gleaming red sports car in the center of the showroom seemed to demand attention. Its sleek design and the perfect way it reflected the showroom lights made it stand out, a symbol of unattainable luxury for most. Gabrielle took a slow step toward it, her eyes scanning every detail. The fine craftsmanship was evident in every curve and edge. But it wasn't the car she was evaluating, it was the people. As she approached, a young man in his late 20s stood nearby, nervously clutching a tablet. His dark hair was neatly combed, and his uniform bore the logo of the showroom. The name tag read, "Miguel Ramirez." Gabrielle offered him a polite smile. "Excuse me," she said, her tone calm and clear. "Can you tell me more about this model? I'd like to know its specs and price." Miguel hesitated, glancing over his shoulder toward the counter where Peter Sullivan stood. The manager was watching the exchange closely, his expression hardening. Miguel turned back to Gabrielle, his voice quiet but professional. "It's one of our premium models, ma'am," he said, but before he could elaborate, Peter strode toward them. Peter's polished shoes clicked sharply against the tile floor as he interrupted with an air of authority. "We don't carry budget models here, ma'am," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "Perhaps you've walked into the wrong showroom?" Gabrielle kept her composure, her smile unwavering. "I'm in the right place," she replied, her voice steady. "I'm interested in this one, and I'd like to hear about its features." Peter's laughter was soft but dismissive. "This car," he said, gesturing dramatically, "isn't just a car. It's a statement. It's for those who appreciate the finer things in life." He paused, letting his gaze sweep over Gabrielle's casual outfit. "Forgive me, but I don't think it's the right fit." Gabrielle raised an eyebrow. And what makes you think that? Peter smirked, leaning slightly toward Miguel. Don't waste your time, he said to the younger man. Let's focus on real buyers. The comment, though directed at Miguel, hung in the air like a sharp blade. A few other customers, previously engaged with their own conversations, turned to watch. Gabrielle became the center of attention, though not by her own choice. Her calm demeanor, however, didn't waver. Across the room, an older gentleman dressed in an impeccable suit glanced briefly at the exchange. William Hargrove, a prominent businessman with an air of entitlement, looked at Gabrielle for a fleeting moment before resuming his inspection of a silver luxury sedan. His indifference added to the tension, a silent reminder of how often such scenes played out unnoticed or ignored. Gabrielle returned her focus to Peter. Her voice, though soft, carried an edge of steel. Do you often judge your customers based on how they look? Peter chuckled dryly. Only when it's obvious they don't belong here. Miguel shifted uncomfortably, his gaze dropping to the floor. He took a hesitant step forward, his voice barely audible as he attempted to intervene. Sir, maybe... Peter cut him off with a sharp wave of his hand. No need, Miguel. I've got this. Gabrielle stepped closer to the car, her fingers brushing the door handle as she studied the interior through the glass. I'd like to see the inside, she said calmly. Is that possible? Peter crossed his arms, his posture stiffening. The interior is reserved for serious buyers, he said, his words biting. Gabrielle turned to face him fully now, her eyes locking onto his. And what exactly qualifies someone as a serious buyer in your opinion? The question hung in the air, a direct challenge that Peter wasn't prepared for. He hesitated, his confidence faltering. It's just policy, he muttered, though his tone lacked conviction. Gabrielle's lips curved into a faint smile, but her eyes held a sharp intensity. Interesting policy, she said, stepping back from the car. I think it's time I called someone who might have a better understanding of it. Peter opened his mouth to respond, but Gabrielle had already pulled out her phone. Her fingers moved deftly across the screen as she placed a call. Yes, it's me, she said into the phone, her voice steady and deliberate. I'm at the Rodeo Drive showroom. There's a situation that requires immediate attention. As she ended the call, Gabrielle slipped her phone back into her pocket, her expression calm yet resolute. Her eyes scanned the room, briefly meeting the curious stares of the other customers. Peter stood frozen, his confidence visibly shaken. The silence in the showroom was palpable, heavy with tension and unspoken questions. All eyes were on Gabrielle now, their curiosity piqued. Gabrielle slipped her phone back into her pocket with a deliberate calmness, her face betraying none of the tension swirling around her. Come to the Rodeo Drive showroom immediately. There's an issue that needs addressing, she had said, her tone measured but resolute. The room was silent, save for the faint hum of the air conditioning and the muffled footsteps of customers on the glossy tile floor. Peter Sullivan arched an eyebrow, a faint smirk tugging at the corners of his mouth. Call whoever you want, he scoffed, folding his arms across his chest. We reserve the right to refuse service to anyone. That's policy. Gabrielle met his gaze, her expression unreadable, but there was a subtle strength in her eyes that unsettled him. Around the showroom, customers continued to browse, though a few stole curious glances toward the escalating interaction. Miguel stood nearby, his posture rigid, his hand gripping the edge of his tablet. His discomfort was palpable. Peter took a step closer, clearly emboldened. You know, he said with a chuckle, this is a waste of everyone's time. If you're not here to make a serious purchase, I think it's best you leave. Gabrielle didn't react immediately. Instead, she turned her attention back to a nearby car, her fingers brushing lightly against its side mirror. Miguel, she said, her voice soft yet commanding, could you tell me more about the available trims on this model? Miguel hesitated, his gaze darting between Gabrielle and Peter. Well, this one comes in 3 engine configurations, he began, but his voice faltered as Peter interrupted with a dismissive laugh. Don't waste your breath, Miguel, Peter said, shaking his head. She's not interested in buying anything. Let's not pretend otherwise. Gabrielle straightened, turning to face Peter fully. For the first time, her voice carried a sharper edge. I'm here to see how this showroom operates. And so far, she said, her tone cutting but calm, you've done an excellent job. of showing me exactly what's wrong. Peter blinked, momentarily taken aback. His confidence wavered, though he quickly masked it with another smirk. Oh, really? And what exactly are you implying? He asked, his voice laced with sarcasm. Gabrielle didn't answer immediately. Instead, she held his gaze for a long moment before turning back to the car. Her silence seemed to unsettle him more than her words. The atmosphere shifted again when the low rumble of an engine grew louder outside. The sound drew the attention of those nearby, including Peter, who glanced toward the glass entrance. A sleek black SUV pulled up to the curb, its glossy exterior catching the sunlight. The vehicle came to a smooth stop, and two men in impeccably tailored suits stepped out. The first man was tall and composed, his silver hair neatly combed back. His demeanor exuded authority, and his stride was purposeful as he entered the showroom. The second man, carrying a leather briefcase, followed closely behind, his sharp eyes scanning the room with practiced precision. Peter stiffened slightly, his arms unfolding as he straightened his posture. The customers who had been watching the earlier interaction now turned their attention to the newcomers, sensing a shift in the room's dynamic. The silver-haired man's eyes immediately found Gabrielle, and his expression softened into one of respect. "Madam Carter," he said, his voice warm and deferential, "my apologies for keeping you waiting. How can I assist you today?" Gabrielle nodded in acknowledgement, her demeanor unchanged. "Richard," she said simply, "thank you for coming so quickly. There's a situation here that requires your attention." Peter's jaw tightened, his gaze flicking between Gabrielle and Richard Edwards, the man now standing before him. "Madam Carter?" he repeated under his breath, confusion and unease creeping into his voice. The second man, the one with the briefcase, stepped forward and offered Gabrielle a respectful nod. His presence added to the weight of the moment, though he said nothing. Gabrielle turned slightly, her eyes scanning the room before settling back on Peter. The faintest hint of a smile played on her lips, though it carried no warmth. Around them, the showroom seemed to hold its breath, the previously bustling atmosphere now charged with anticipation. Peter, struggling to piece together what was unfolding, felt the ground shift beneath him, his gaze darting between Gabrielle and Richard. His earlier bravado had evaporated, replaced by a growing unease. His voice wavered as he finally asked, Who is she that you're treating her like this?" Richard Edwards, his expression somber, stepped forward. He adjusted his tie, his posture exuding authority. "Mr. Sullivan," he began, his tone sharp, "Madam Carter is not just another customer. She is the majority shareholder of this entire company. Everything you see here, every showroom, every car, every employee, is under her ownership." The room seemed to still as Richard's words sank in. Peter's mouth opened slightly, his expression shifting from disbelief to panic. I didn't know," he stammered, his earlier confidence now reduced to a fragile whisper. Gabrielle turned to face him, her calm composure unwavering. "That's exactly the problem," she said, her voice measured yet piercing. "You didn't know, but you assumed. You judged me based on nothing more than appearances and made decisions that go against everything this company stands for." Peter's face flushed red as he fumbled for words. I just thought," he started, but Gabrielle cut him off. "Exactly," she said, her tone firm. "You thought, but you didn't listen, you didn't observe, and you certainly didn't act with respect. That's why we're in this position right now." The weight of her words hung heavy in the air. Customers who had been quietly watching from a distance now exchanged murmurs, their faces reflecting a mix of surprise and intrigue. Miguel, who had been standing near the edge of the scene, shifted uncomfortably before finally stepping forward. "Madam Carter," he began hesitantly, his voice low but steady, "I'm sorry for not stepping in earlier. I was afraid of losing my job." Gabrielle turned her gaze toward him, her expression softening. "Don't apologize for being afraid," she said gently. "But remember this, staying silent in the face of injustice is still a choice. Next time, make the right one." Miguel nodded, his eyes filled with both gratitude and determination. It was a brief exchange, but one that carried a deeper significance for him. Richard cleared his throat, attempting to redirect the conversation. "Madam Carter," he said carefully, Perhaps we should handle this matter internally. A full review of the situation can be conducted, and we can address any issues appropriately. Gabrielle shook her head slightly, her resolve evident. No, Richard, she replied. This isn't something that can be swept under the rug. This is about the culture we cultivate here, what we allow, what we tolerate. And I won't tolerate this. Turning back to Peter, she squared her shoulders. Effective immediately. You are suspended from your position pending further investigation, she announced. Your behavior today has shown a clear disregard for the values this company is built upon. Peter's face drained of color. Wait, he said, his voice rising slightly. You can't just... I already have, Gabrielle interrupted, her tone final. This isn't about you, Mr. Sullivan. This is about ensuring that every person who walks into one of my showrooms is treated with dignity and respect. The murmurs among the customers grew louder, a mix of shock and approval. Peter looked around, his eyes searching for an ally, but no one came to his defense. Even Miguel, who had once deferred to him, now stood silently by Gabrielle's side. Gabrielle stepped back, her gaze sweeping across the room. This company is not just about selling luxury cars, she said, her voice carrying a quiet strength. It's about building a brand that people trust, that people respect, and that starts with how we treat one another. As the weight of her words settled over the room, a new energy seemed to take hold. Customers whispered among themselves, employees exchanged glances, and Miguel stood a little taller. Gabrielle's presence was unmistakable. She wasn't just a leader, she was a force of change. Peter, on the other hand, remained rooted to the spot, his expression a mixture of disbelief and humiliation. His usual confidence was nowhere to be found, replaced instead by the stark realization that his actions had consequences. Gabrielle turned to Richard. I want a meeting with the rest of the leadership team, she said. We need to address this company-wide. Richard nodded quickly. Of course, Madam Carter. I'll arrange it immediately. Gabrielle gave a slight nod of acknowledgement before stepping away, her calm demeanor unshaken. The room seemed to follow her lead, the tension slowly dissipating as people returned to their business, but not without casting a few lingering glances toward Peter. For Gabrielle, this was just the beginning. The work to rebuild and reaffirm the company's values would be challenging, but she was ready. As she walked toward the exit, her eyes carried the quiet determination of someone who had faced countless battles before and won. Peter Sullivan stormed into the office lounge, his face a mixture of anger and disbelief. His usual polished demeanor was gone, replaced by a scowl that made the few employees lingering nearby exchange wary glances. He turned sharply, heading toward Richard Edwards and Gabrielle Carter, who were standing by the wide windows overlooking Rodeo Drive. This is absurd, monsieur, Peter said, his voice loud enough to echo through the room. I've worked here for over a decade. I've built relationships with the kind of clients that make this place profitable. And now, just because of one misunderstanding, you're going to tear everything apart? Gabrielle didn't flinch. She turned slowly to face him, her expression calm but unyielding. Mr. Sullivan, she said evenly, your tenure here doesn't excuse your behavior. What you call a misunderstanding is a pattern of conduct that undermines everything this company stands for. Peter's jaw tightened. You can't just waltz in here and act like you understand how things work. I've kept this showroom running smoothly for years. Gabrielle took a step closer, her tone still measured. And in doing so, you've fostered an environment where judgment and prejudice dictate who gets treated with respect. That's not running a showroom, Mr. Sullivan. That's undermining the very principles that built this company. Peter's eyes narrowed, but before he could respond, Richard Edwards intervened, stepping between them with a raised hand. Let's take a step back, he said, his voice low and conciliatory. Gabrielle, perhaps we should reconsider the approach here. Removing Peter so abruptly could cause unrest among the staff and even jeopardize some of our client relationships. Gabrielle's gaze shifted to Richard, her expression softening slightly. I understand your concerns, she said after a pause, but let me ask you this. What message are we sending if we allow behavior like his to go unchecked? Are we so afraid of short-term discomfort that we're willing to sacrifice long-term integrity? Richard hesitated, clearly weighing her words. Peter, meanwhile, folded his arms tightly across his chest, his scowl deepening. This isn't about integrity, Peter muttered. This is about power. You're trying to make a point, and I'm the scapegoat. Gabriel's eyes met his again, and this time there was a flash of fire behind them. If holding people accountable for their actions feels like an attack on you, Mr. Sullivan, then perhaps you should reevaluate why that is. The room fell silent, the weight of her words lingering. After a tense moment, Richard cleared his throat. We need to handle this delicately, he said. The last thing we want is to make headlines for the wrong reasons. Gabrielle didn't reply immediately. Instead, she turned to look out the window, her mind pulling her back to a different time. She thought of her younger self standing in a bank lobby, being told she didn't qualify for a loan. Not because of her financial standing, but because of assumptions made about her background. That moment had fueled her drive to succeed, to create a world where such judgments didn't hold power. She exhaled slowly and turned back to Richard. I understand the stakes, she said finally, but I've been in rooms where people chose silence because it was easier than confronting the truth. And I've seen the damage that silence can do. I won't be part of that. Richard nodded, though his expression remained tense. Very well, he said, but let's ensure we approach this carefully. Later that evening, Gabrielle sat in the quiet of her office, the hum of the city just audible through the large windows. She leaned back in her chair, her mind replaying the events of the day. Her resolve was strong, but she couldn't ignore the weight of the decisions she had to make. A soft knock at the door pulled her from her thoughts. Come in, she called. Miguel stepped inside, his posture hesitant but determined. Madam Carter, he began, his voice steady despite the nervous energy in his eyes. I need to tell you something. Gabrielle gestured for him to sit. Go ahead, she said. Miguel sat on the edge of the chair, his hands gripping his knees. It's about Mr. Sullivan, he said. He's not just difficult with customers. He's been intimidating with staff, too. He's made comments, sometimes even threats, to keep people in line. I didn't say anything before because I was scared, but seeing you stand up to him today, it made me realize I can't stay silent anymore. Gabrielle studied him for a moment before nodding. Thank you for telling me, Miguel, she said. It takes courage to speak up, and I appreciate it. Miguel exhaled, his shoulders relaxing slightly. I just want to work in a place where people are treated fairly, he said. That's all. Gabrielle smiled faintly. So do I, she said, and that's what we're going to build. The next morning, Gabrielle made her decision. Standing in front of a small team of executives, she announced plans for a press conference. We're not just addressing this internally, she said. We're going to show the world what this company stands for and what it won't tolerate. The room was quiet, the weight of her words settling over them. Gabrielle looked around, her eyes meeting each of theirs. This isn't just about one person, she continued. It's about setting a standard, and we're starting today. The morning air felt heavier than usual as Gabrielle prepared for the press conference. The silence in her office was interrupted by the soft ping of her phone. It was a message from Richard. You need to see this, it read, followed by a link. Gabrielle clicked, and her screen was flooded with an article bearing a bold, inflammatory headline. New money, old problems. Gabrielle Carter's takeover is destabilizing luxury auto showrooms. The article was a carefully crafted attack, portraying Gabrielle as a power-hungry novice who had no real understanding of the industry. It cited anonymous sources claiming she was driving away key clients and alienating staff. The piece dripped with condescension, calling her a woman out of her depth. Gabrielle leaned back in her chair, letting out a slow breath. She could almost hear Peter Sullivan's smug laughter behind the words. The timing was too perfect to be a coincidence. He was behind this, of course. Minutes later, Richard called. His voice was strained, his usual calm replaced by concern. Gabrielle, this article is making waves. A few of our major suppliers are already asking questions. They're worried about how this might affect their association with us. Gabrielle listened quietly, her grip tightening on her pen. Let them ask, she said evenly. I'll answer them. Richard hesitated before continuing. It's not just the suppliers. Some of the employees are uneasy. They're wondering if this transition is really the right direction for the company. I've overheard whispers that maybe you don't fully understand what this business requires. Gabrielle closed her eyes briefly, feeling the weight of his words. "Thank you for telling me, Richard," she said after a moment. "I'll address it." When the call ended, she sat in silence, the room growing still around her. The pressure was mounting, and she could feel its cold grip on her shoulders. But this wasn't unfamiliar territory. Gabrielle had faced doubts, criticism, and outright hostility before. This was just another battle in a war she had been fighting her entire life. By the time the press conference began, the tension was palpable. Journalists filled the room, their cameras and microphones pointed toward the podium. Gabrielle stood backstage, her hands resting lightly on the edge of a table. She could hear the faint murmurs of the crowd, the low hum of whispered speculations. "Madam Carter," one of her aides said, gently tapping her arm. "We're ready." Gabrielle stepped onto the stage with steady strides, her expression composed. The chatter in the room dimmed as all eyes turned to her. She scanned the audience briefly, noting the mix of curiosity, skepticism, and even hostility in their gazes. She began her address with a measured tone, outlining the company's commitment to quality, innovation, and inclusivity. Her words were clear, her delivery confident, but it was evident that not everyone was convinced. Then came the question she had anticipated. A reporter in the front row, a man with sharp features and an even sharper voice, raised his hand. Without waiting for acknowledgement, he asked, "Madam Carter, how do you plan to lead a luxury auto business when you clearly don't come from the same world as its clientele? Some might say you lack the pedigree required to understand this market." The room grew quiet, the tension thickening like a storm about to break. Gabrielle met his gaze, her expression unflinching. She let the silence hang for a moment before speaking. "I don't need to come from the world of wealth," she said, her voice steady and clear. "I've seen what it means to be overlooked, dismissed, and underestimated. And because of that, I understand better than most that every person who walks into one of our showrooms deserves respect, regardless of what they look like, where they come from, or how much money they have." Her words resonated in the room, a ripple of emotion passing through the crowd. Gabrielle continued, her tone unwavering. "This isn't just about selling cars, it's about building trust. It's about creating an environment where everyone feels valued. That's the kind of company I'm building. And it's the kind of company that will thrive, not just because of what we sell, but because of what we stand for." When she finished, there was a brief moment of silence before the first applause broke out. It started with one or two hands but quickly spread. While not everyone joined in, the sound was loud enough to fill the space, a testament to the impact of her words. As Gabrielle stepped off the stage, she caught a glimpse of Peter Sullivan standing near the back of the room. His arms were crossed and a faint smirk played on his lips. It was clear he believed this was far from over, that the pressures would continue to mount until she broke. But Gabrielle wasn't about to give him the satisfaction. As she walked past him, her shoulders straight and her chin held high, she reminded herself of one simple truth. She had faced worse and emerged stronger. "This is just the beginning," she thought, her resolve hardening. "I've overcome bigger challenges than this." Gabrielle leaned back in her chair, the soft glow of her desk lamp casting long shadows across her office. The silence of the room was broken only by the occasional hum of traffic from Rodeo Drive below. On her computer screen was the email her internal team had uncovered, a damning piece of evidence linking Peter Sullivan to a deliberate smear campaign. It was clear now. Sullivan had not acted alone. He had worked with a rival company, sharing insider information and planting stories in the media to sabotage her leadership. She read the email again, her jaw tightening. The words coordinated effort and undermining leadership seemed to pulse on the screen, each phrase stoking the fire of her determination. Gabrielle closed the email, her fingers tapping lightly on the desk. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about the integrity of the company she had worked so hard to rebuild. Without hesitation, she reached for her phone and called Richard Edwards. "I want every regional manager in the Los Angeles area in a meeting tomorrow morning," she said firmly. "We need to address this head on." "Understood," Richard replied, his voice steady but tinged with concern. "Do you want Sullivan present?" "Absolutely," Gabrielle said. "He needs to hear this with everyone else." The next morning, the conference room buzzed with quiet murmurs as the regional leadership team gathered. Miguel sat at the far end of the table, his hands folded tightly in front of him. Though he had largely stayed in the background during previous meetings, today felt different. He knew what was at stake, and he felt compelled to step forward. Gabrielle entered the room, her presence immediately commanding attention. She carried a folder in one hand and a calm, resolute expression. Behind her trailed Richard, who glanced around the room before closing the door. "Good morning," Gabrielle began, her voice even but firm. "I've called this meeting to address a matter of great importance. As many of you know, recent events have cast a shadow over our company's reputation. Today, we're going to confront the source of that shadow." She placed the folder on the table and opened it, pulling out a printout of the email chain her team had uncovered. "This," she said, holding it up, "is proof that one of our own has been actively working against us." The room fell silent, the weight of her words settling over the team. Miguel shifted in his seat, his gaze flicking towards Sullivan, who sat with his arms crossed and a smug expression. Gabrielle turned to face him directly. "Peter Sullivan," she said, her tone sharper now, "you've been collaborating with a rival company, leaking internal information, and orchestrating a campaign to undermine this leadership team. Do you deny it?" Sullivan leaned back in his chair, a faint smirk playing on his lips. "I did what was necessary to protect this company," he said. "Someone had to step up when it became clear that your leadership was lacking." Miguel's hands clenched into fists under the table. He had seen Sullivan's arrogance before, but this was a new level of audacity. He hesitated for only a moment before speaking up. "That's not true," he said, his voice firm but measured. "You didn't protect anything. You bullied staff, manipulated clients, and made decisions that served only your interests." All eyes turned to Miguel, and Gabrielle gave him a brief nod of encouragement. "Go on," she said. Miguel took a deep breath. "I've worked here for years, and I've seen how Mr. Sullivan operates. He's intimidated employees into silence and created a culture of fear. That's not leadership. That's sabotage." Gabrielle turned her attention back to Sullivan. "You've heard it from your own team," she said. "Your actions have not only jeopardized our reputation, but also the trust we've worked so hard to rebuild. This is not the behavior of someone who cares about this company." Sullivan leaned forward, his smirk fading. "I've been here longer than most of you," he said. "I know how this industry works. If you think you can run this place without me, you're in for a rude awakening." Gabrielle didn't flinch. "This isn't about you," she said, her voice steady. "It's about the values this company represents, and right now you're standing in the way of those values." She turned to Richard. "Effective immediately, Peter Sullivan is terminated from his position," she said. "We will also be launching a full investigation into his actions and implementing stricter policies to prevent this from happening again." The room buzzed with murmurs as Sullivan stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "You'll regret this," he said, his voice low and venomous. "This company won't survive without me." Gabrielle met his glare with unwavering resolve. "We'll survive," she said, "and we'll thrive, because we'll finally be free of the toxicity you brought into this workplace." Sullivan stormed out, slamming the door behind him. The room was silent for a moment before Gabrielle turned back to the team. "This is a turning point," she said. "We're not just rebuilding a company, we're redefining what it stands for, and I need every one of you to be part of that." She glanced at Miguel, who nodded in quiet determination. For the first time, he felt not just like an employee, but like someone who could make a difference. As the meeting adjourned, Gabrielle stood by the window, watching as Sullivan's car disappeared down the street. She knew this wasn't the end of the fight, but it was a victory, a step toward the future she was determined to build. The days following Peter Sullivan's dismissal were far from quiet. Within hours of his departure, whispers turned into headlines. Industry blogs and trade publications speculated about Gabrielle's leadership, with some even questioning her qualifications. Words like unproven and outsider were scattered across articles, fueling doubts among customers and partners alike. The ripple effects were undeniable. Sales reports showed a slight but noticeable dip, and a few suppliers began delaying their responses to contracts. Gabrielle stood by the large window in her office, her arms crossed as she gazed at the bustling street below. The usual energy of Rodeo Drive felt distant, as though it belonged to another world entirely. Her phone buzzed on the desk, snapping her out of her thoughts. It was Richard Edwards. "Gabriel," he began, his tone serious, "we're starting to see hesitation from some of our major suppliers. They're watching the situation closely, and a few have expressed concerns about whether we can maintain the reputation they've come to expect." Gabrielle turned from the window and picked up the phone, her voice steady. "What do you suggest, Richard?" He hesitated before answering. "We need to act quickly. A strong PR move, a major event, something that reminds people why they trust us in the first place. If we don't get ahead of this, it could spiral out of control." Gabrielle sat down, her fingers drumming lightly on the desk. "You're right," she said after a moment. "Let's meet with the marketing team tomorrow. We need to make a statement." The following day, Gabrielle gathered her core team in the conference room. The tension in the air was palpable, but she entered with her usual calm. Taking her place at the head of the table, she addressed the group. "We're facing challenges from all sides," she began, "but challenges aren't new to us. What we need now is a bold move, a reminder to everyone from our customers to our competitors that this company stands for something bigger than just cars." The team exchanged glances, waiting for her to elaborate. Gabrielle continued, her voice firm. "I propose we host an event at our Rodeo Drive showroom. Not just a showcase of luxury vehicles, but a celebration of our values. We'll invite representatives from all communities, those who often feel excluded from spaces like ours. This will be our chance to redefine what luxury means." Miguel, who sat a few seats down, leaned forward. "That's a strong start," he said. "But what if we take it further? We could feature stories from some of our loyal customers, people who've experienced what makes our showrooms different. Hearing directly from them could be powerful." Gabrielle nodded thoughtfully. "I like that," she said. "It's personal, authentic. Let's make it happen." As the meeting adjourned, Gabrielle lingered in the room, reviewing the notes she had taken. The plan was ambitious, but she knew it was necessary. Still, as the weight of the decisions settled on her shoulders, doubts crept in. She returned to her office, closing the door behind her. Sitting at her desk, she allowed herself a rare moment of vulnerability. The doubts she had pushed aside now came rushing in. Could she truly succeed in an industry that seemed so determined to see her fail? Would her efforts ever be enough to change the minds of those who judge her solely by her background? Her thoughts wandered to memories of her early career. The banks that had rejected her business proposals, the rooms where her ideas were dismissed before she had even finished speaking. Those experiences had shaped her resilience, but they had also left scars. She leaned back in her chair, exhaling slowly. "You've been here before," she murmured to herself, "and you made it through. You'll make it through this too." The day of the event arrived quickly. The showroom was alive with activity, technicians fine-tuning the lighting, caterers setting up elegant displays, and staff ensuring every car gleamed under the spotlight. Gabrielle stood outside watching as the final touches were put in place. She could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her, but she also felt a spark of determination. This wasn't just about defending her position. It was about proving that her vision for the company was not only valid, but necessary. As the first guests began to arrive, Gabrielle straightened her posture and took a deep breath. The journey ahead was still uncertain, but she knew one thing for sure. This was her moment to lead. The showroom on Rodeo Drive had never looked more radiant. Every surface sparkled under the warm glow of strategically placed lights, reflecting off the polished exteriors of luxury cars that lined the floor. The soft hum of conversation mixed with the gentle notes of a string quartet playing in the corner. This was more than just an event. It was a declaration. Gabrielle had planned every detail to ensure that tonight would redefine how the industry saw her and her company. Guests began to fill the room, representing a mix of backgrounds and lifestyles. Wealthy entrepreneurs in tailored suits sipped champagne next to middle-class professionals who had saved for years to own their first luxury car. Among them were a handful of people Gabrielle had personally invited, those who had once been turned away from other showrooms due to prejudices or assumptions. Their presence was a quiet but powerful statement. Gabrielle stood near the entrance, watching as the room came to life. She wore a simple yet elegant black gown that exuded confidence and authority. A subtle silver necklace glinted at her collarbone, adding just the right touch of refinement. She moved through the crowd, exchanging polite smiles and handshakes, her demeanor poised but approachable. When it was time to begin, a gentle chime signaled the guests to gather near the stage. Gabrielle took a deep breath before stepping into the spotlight. The room quieted as all eyes turned to her. "Good evening," she began, her voice steady and clear. "Thank you all for being here tonight. This isn't just an event to showcase cars. It's a celebration of what we stand for." She paused, scanning the room, ensuring she met the gaze of as many people as possible. "We don't just sell vehicles here. We sell dreams. And dreams don't discriminate based on skin color, background, or appearance." A wave of applause rippled through the crowd, but Gabrielle noticed the subtle shifts in body language among some of the wealthier guests. A few exchanged glances, their expressions unreadable. She pressed on. "This company is built on the belief that everyone deserves respect," she continued. "And tonight, we reaffirm that commitment, not just to our customers, but to ourselves." As the applause swelled again, Gabrielle stepped back from the podium, a small smile gracing her lips. But just as the energy in the room seemed to settle into a positive rhythm, a sharp voice cut through the air. "Madam Carter," a reporter called from the front. The man stood with a notebook in one hand and a recording device in the other. "Do you believe your decision to dismiss Peter Sullivan has harmed the brand? Several of his longtime clients have reportedly refused to return." The room tensed, the applause fading into a tense silence. Gabrielle straightened, her gaze locking onto the reporter. "Thank you for your question," she said, her tone calm but with an edge of authority. "This brand has never been about any one individual. It's about the values we uphold. And if someone cannot align with those values, they don't belong here, whether they're an employee or a customer." The reporter opened his mouth to respond, but Gabrielle continued before he could speak. "To those who have chosen to leave, I can only say this. We will continue to grow, not by catering to exclusion, but by embracing inclusivity. That is what makes us stronger." The response earned a fresh round of applause, though Gabrielle noted a few guests whispering among themselves. Doubts, though faint, lingered in the air like a shadow. Then, just as she prepared to conclude her remarks, a commotion near the entrance drew everyone's attention. The sound of raised voices and hurried footsteps cut through the room. A moment later, the head of security approached Gabrielle, leaning in to whisper. "Madam Carter, Peter Sullivan is here," he said. "He's demanding to speak." Gabrielle's expression didn't change, but her pulse quickened. Before she could respond, the doors swung open, and there he was. Peter Sullivan strode into the room, his suit slightly rumpled, but his posture defiant. The murmurs among the crowd grew louder as he made his way toward the stage. "You can't silence me, Gabrielle," he said, his voice carrying over the crowd. "You think you can erase me from this company and just move on? You're fooling yourself." Gabrielle stepped forward, her eyes narrowing slightly. Sullivan stopped a few feet away from the stage, turning to address the room. "She wants to change this industry, but we all know it's impossible. This world isn't built for people like her to succeed. And deep down, you all know that too." The crowd shifted uncomfortably, the weight of his words hanging in the air. Gabrielle's grip on the microphone tightened, but her voice remained steady as she spoke. "You're right about one thing, Peter," she said, her tone cutting through the tension. "This industry wasn't built for people like me. But that's exactly why I'm here, to change that." The room fell silent again, every eye on her. Gabrielle stepped closer to the edge of the stage, her gaze fixed on Sullivan. "You see, I don't need to change the entire industry in one day, but I will start changing it today. And no matter how much you try to stop me, you won't succeed." Her words hung in the air, commanding the room. Sullivan's expression faltered, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his face. The crowd erupted into applause, louder and more unified than before. Gabrielle didn't move, her eyes still locked on Sullivan, until he turned and walked out of the room. As the doors closed behind him, Gabrielle exhaled softly, her confidence unshaken. She turned back to the crowd, a determined smile on her face. This wasn't just a victory, it was a statement, and it was only the beginning. The room was still charged with the tension Sullivan had left in his wake. Gabrielle remained at the center of it all, her presence steady, her gaze sweeping over the faces in the crowd. The murmurs of uncertainty and curiosity filled the air, but she didn't rush to respond. Instead, she let the weight of the moment settle, ensuring that every eye stayed on her. Gabrielle raised the microphone again, her voice cutting through the murmurs. Ladies and gentlemen, let me make one thing very clear. This company does not and will not need people like Peter Sullivan to thrive. We don't need arrogance, exclusion, or judgment to succeed. What we need, what we stand for, is fairness, transparency, and genuine service. The murmurs quieted. She paused, letting her words sink in, then continued, her tone softer but no less powerful. And to show you what I mean, I'd like to share a story. My story. A hush fell over the crowd. Gabrielle's posture shifted slightly, not in weakness, but in authenticity. Years ago, she began, I walked into a bank, ready to pitch my business idea. I had spent months preparing every detail, every number. But before I could even finish my presentation, the loan officer told me, this isn't the kind of place for someone like you. No explanation, no consideration, just dismissal. Her voice didn't waver, but there was an edge of emotion behind it, one that resonated with the room. That moment could have broken me, but instead it fueled me. It made me determined to build something better, something that wouldn't judge people based on appearances or backgrounds. And that's why I stand here today, to ensure that no one who walks into one of our showrooms ever feels like they don't belong. The crowd's stillness was palpable, broken only by a single clap from the back. It was hesitant at first, then another joined and another. Soon the applause swelled, filling the room. Gabrielle took a step back, her gaze meeting those of the guests who had doubted her just moments ago. Some nodded in approval, others smiled, their expressions softened. From the corner of the room, an older man in a tailored suit stood up. His silver hair caught the light as he cleared his throat. Madam Carter, he said, his voice carrying over the applause, I believe you're doing the right thing. This industry doesn't just need new cars, it needs new values. His statement sparked a ripple effect. Guests who had been skeptical moments earlier began clapping more enthusiastically, their expressions shifting from doubt to support. The energy in the room transformed, and that evening, Gabrielle felt the tide turning in her favor. As the applause reached its peak, a sharp voice tried to cut through it. This is ridiculous, Sullivan shouted, his face red with frustration. He had lingered near the back, his confidence eroding as Gabrielle spoke. Now he pushed forward, his voice rising above the crowd. You're all fools if you think she can change anything. This industry doesn't bend for people like her. The room turned toward him, but this time the response was different. The applause didn't stop. It grew louder, drowning out his protests. Sullivan's words were lost in the rising tide of support for Gabrielle. Security approached him, their presence firm but unobtrusive. You'll regret this, Sullivan yelled as he was escorted out. This industry will chew you up and spit you out. Gabrielle didn't flinch. She stood tall, watching as Sullivan was led away. When the doors closed behind him, she turned back to the crowd. Her voice was calm but resolute. People like Peter Sullivan have always believed they're untouchable. But tonight we've shown them that change is possible. And this is only the beginning. The crowd erupted into another wave of applause, this time even louder. Gabrielle stepped off the stage, shaking hands and exchanging words of gratitude with guests as they approached her. Each handshake, each kind word, felt like a small victory, a reminder that her vision was worth fighting for. As the event wound down and the last guest departed, Gabrielle returned to her office upstairs. She sank into her chair, the adrenaline of the evening slowly giving way to exhaustion. The glow of her phone screen caught her attention, and she picked it up to check her messages. One stood out, a text from an unknown number. The message was brief but chilling. Don't think this is over. We won't let you win. Gabrielle stared at the words for a moment, her grip tightening on the phone. The threat was real, but so was her resolve. She placed the phone down, exhaling slowly, her mind already turning to the challenges ahead. This is the cost of change, she thought to herself, her gaze steady. And I'm willing to pay it. The early morning light filtered through the glass walls of the conference room, casting long shadows on the polished wooden table where Gabrielle's senior leadership team sat. The air was heavy with tension, a quiet acknowledgement of the challenges that loomed over the company. Gabrielle, seated at the head of the table, surveyed the faces before her. Each expression reflected varying degrees of concern, uncertainty, and determination. She straightened in her chair, her voice cutting through the silence. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice," she began. "Last night's event was a success in many ways, but it's clear we're facing significant challenges. The threats we've received, the rumors being spread, they're designed to destabilize us. We can't let that happen." Miguel, seated to her right, leaned forward. Over the past weeks, his confidence had grown visibly, and he spoke with conviction. "Madam Carter," he said, "if our competitors want to play dirty, we need to respond strategically. I think it's time we shift from defense to offense." Gabrielle arched an eyebrow, signaling for him to continue. "We've built this brand on the principles of transparency and community," Miguel said. "Let's lean into that. If they want to spread lies, we'll counter with the truth, loudly. What if we launch a community open doors initiative? Invite the public into our showrooms, show them how we operate, and let them see firsthand what we stand for." The room murmured with interest. Gabrielle tapped her fingers lightly on the table, considering the proposal. "That's a bold move," she said. "It aligns perfectly with our values, but we'll need to ensure the execution is flawless. If we're inviting the world in, we have to be ready for the scrutiny that comes with it." Richard Edwards, always pragmatic, added, "It's risky, but I agree it could pay off. People need to see we're not hiding anything. It could turn this whole situation in our favor." Gabrielle nodded. "Let's move forward with it. Miguel, I want you to lead the planning. Work closely with marketing and operations to ensure every showroom is prepared." Miguel's face lit up with determination. "I'll make it happen," he said. As plans began to take shape, Gabrielle's phone buzzed on the table. She glanced at the screen, her expression tightening briefly before she silenced the device. The anonymous messages were becoming more frequent, each one more threatening than the last. But she refused to let fear dictate her actions. Meanwhile, Sullivan was far from idle. In a dimly lit office across town, he sat with representatives from one of Gabrielle's largest competitors. A sly grin spread across his face as he slid a folder across the table. "This," he said, "is everything you need to know about her next moves. Client lists, marketing strategies, and internal memos. If you want to take her down, this is how you do it." The rival executives exchanged glances, their expressions a mix of interest and skepticism. "If this backfires, it's on you," one of them said. Sullivan leaned back in his chair, confidence oozing from his posture. "Trust me," he said, "she won't see it coming." Within days, the rumors began circulating online and in industry circles. Claims that Gabrielle was diluting the brand's exclusivity to cater to middle-income customers spread like wildfire. Some news outlets picked up the story, adding fuel to the fire. The narrative threatened to erode the trust of Gabrielle's most loyal and influent clients. Back in the office, Gabrielle faced a new wave of pressure. A group of minor shareholders called for an emergency meeting, demanding answers about the company's direction. "If you continue on this path," one email warned, "you risk destroying everything this brand has built." Gabrielle sat alone in her office that evening, her hands resting on her desk. The quiet was oppressive, broken only by the hum of the city outside. She felt the weight of the choices ahead, choices that would determine not only her company's future, but also her own legacy. Her phone buzzed again, another anonymous message flashing on the screen. "Step down while you still can." "You don't belong here." Gabrielle exhaled slowly, her resolve hardening. She picked up the phone and dialed Richard. "Schedule the shareholder meeting for Friday," she said. "I'll address them directly." "And the rumors?" Richard asked. "We'll address those too," Gabrielle replied. "I'll share the truth, all of it." The day of the meeting arrived quickly. Gabrielle stood outside the conference room, her hands resting lightly on the back of a chair as she gathered her thoughts. When she stepped inside, the room was filled with murmurs and side conversations. The shareholders, a mix of seasoned investors and younger stakeholders, looked up as she entered. Gabrielle moved to the front of the room, her posture confident. She took a moment to meet the eyes of each person present before speaking. "Thank you all for coming," she began. "I know there are questions, concerns, even doubts about the direction this company is taking. I won't shy away from them. Today, I'm here to address everything truthfully and transparently." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. "But this isn't just about the company. It's about something much bigger. It's about what we represent and what we can become." The room was silent, every eye fixed on her. Gabrielle took a breath, the weight of the moment heavy but empowering. "This is our turning point," she said, "and I'm ready to lead us through it." The boardroom was filled to capacity, the tension in the air almost tangible. Gabrielle stood at the head of the long mahogany table, her back straight and her expression calm but commanding. Around her, the shareholders sat, their expressions ranging from curiosity to skepticism. At the far end of the table, a few familiar faces aligned with Sullivan whispered among themselves, casting sidelong glances at her. Gabrielle took a deep breath, her resolve unshaken. "Thank you all for being here today," she began, her voice steady and clear. "I've called this meeting not just to address the concerns that have been raised, but to lay bare the truth about what's been happening within our company." She placed a stack of documents on the table and looked around the room. "Over the past few weeks, we've faced challenges, some external, some internal. And I've uncovered evidence that one of our own has been working against us." Before she could continue, the door to the boardroom swung open, and Peter Sullivan strode in, his steps deliberate and his smirk firmly in place. The room stirred at his unexpected arrival, whispers rippling through the shareholders. Gabrielle didn't flinch, her eyes locking onto him as he approached. "I think I deserve a chance to defend myself," Sullivan said, his voice loud enough to command attention as he took an empty seat. "After all, I've been accused of a lot lately." Gabrielle raised an eyebrow, her calm demeanor unbroken. "You'll have your chance," she said. "But first, let me present the facts." She clicked a remote, and a large screen at the front of the room lit up. The first slide displayed a series of leaked emails, correspondences between Sullivan and representatives from a rival company. Gasps and murmurs filled the room as Gabrielle walked them through each piece of evidence. These emails show that Mr. Sullivan has not only shared confidential company information, but has actively worked with our competitors to undermine our reputation. Gabrielle said, her voice growing firmer with each word. "This is not just unethical, it's a betrayal of everything this company stands for." Sullivan leaned forward, his smirk fading slightly. "I didn't betray anyone," he said, his tone defensive. "I did what I had to do to protect the brand. You're the one dragging it through the mud, trying to cater to people who don't belong in this industry." Gabrielle turned to face him fully, her eyes sharp. "Protect the brand?" she said, her voice slicing through the tension. "The only thing you've protected is your ego. Real value doesn't come from exclusion or arrogance. It comes from how we treat people, from the trust we build with our customers. And you've destroyed that trust." The room fell silent, all eyes on the two of them. Sullivan opened his mouth to respond, but before he could, Richard Edwards stood. His usually composed demeanor carried a rare intensity as he addressed the room. "I've worked with many leaders in my career," Richard said, his voice firm, "but none have shown the vision, the courage, and the integrity that Gabrielle Carter has. She's not just leading this company, she's redefining what it means to lead in this industry. I stand with her, and I believe you should too." The room erupted into scattered applause, but Sullivan wasn't ready to give up. "You're all blind if you think she can pull this off," he sneered. "She's making this company a laughingstock, and you're just letting it happen." Gabrielle remained composed, gesturing to the screen again. "If anyone still doubts my claims," she said, "I invite you to watch this." The next slide played a video from the security cameras at the Rodeo Drive showroom. The footage clearly showed Sullivan handing an envelope to a journalist in a quiet corner of the showroom. The envelope's contents, a bribe to produce negative press, were undeniable. The room froze. Even Sullivan, who had been full of bluster moments ago, was visibly shaken. The silence was deafening as the video ended, and Gabrielle turned back to the room. "This," she said, gesturing to the screen, "is the reality of Peter Sullivan's actions. He didn't protect this company. He used it for his own gain and tried to destroy it when he didn't get his way." One by one, the shareholders began to murmur, their expressions shifting from doubt to indignation. Finally, one of the senior members of the board spoke up. "It's clear where the fault lies," he said. "Peter Sullivan has no place in this company. I move that we vote to remove him permanently." The motion was met with unanimous agreement, and Sullivan's fate was sealed. Security was called to escort him out, and as he was led from the room, he turned to Gabrielle one last time. "You think this is over?" he said, his voice bitter. "This industry will never accept you. You'll fail, and when you do, don't say I didn't warn you." Gabrielle didn't respond, her steady gaze following him until the door closed behind him. She turned back to the room, her expression resolute. "This isn't just about removing one bad actor," she said. "This is about rebuilding trust and moving forward with a clear vision. I'm announcing a new initiative to expand our customer base while staying true to our core values: respect, fairness, and exceptional quality. If anyone here feels they can't support that vision, now is the time to step away." The room was silent for a moment before one shareholder stood. "I support you," he said. Another followed, then another, until the majority had voiced their approval. Gabrielle felt a wave of relief but knew the battle was far from over. As the meeting adjourned and the shareholders filed out, Gabrielle remained behind, standing by the window and watching as Sullivan was escorted from the building. There was no triumph in her expression, only a quiet determination. "This is just the beginning," she thought. "The real work starts now." The air was thick with tension as Gabrielle sat at her desk, scrolling through the latest headlines. The accusations against her were plastered across every major business news outlet. Words like embezzlement and mismanagement jumped off the screen, each headline more damning than the last. Though she knew the documents Sullivan had circulated were fabrications, the damage was already done. Doubts were creeping into the minds of customers, partners, and even some of her most loyal employees. Her phone buzzed. It was Richard Edwards. "Gabrielle," he began, his tone heavy, "the board is demanding an independent investigation. They say we need to be transparent to calm the shareholders." Gabrielle exhaled deeply, pressing her fingers to her temple. "I understand," she said. "Let them conduct their investigation. We have nothing to hide." Richard hesitated. "You know this won't be easy. Sullivan's made sure this gets messy." Gabrielle's jaw tightened. "Messy or not, we don't run from the truth. Let them look into every file, every receipt. I want them to see how this company operates, honestly and transparently." After the call, Gabrielle stood and paced the room, her thoughts racing. She paused by the window, watching the busy streets of Beverly Hills below. The fight wasn't just about clearing her name. It was about protecting the vision she had worked so hard to build. That evening, Gabrielle called a meeting with her leadership team. Miguel, now an integral part of her inner circle, entered with an anxious expression, holding his laptop. "We've got a problem," he said, setting it down and pulling up an email. "This came in an hour ago. It's from an anonymous source, claiming to have more evidence against you. They're threatening to release it unless you step down." Gabrielle read the email, her eyes narrowing. It was another attempt to intimidate her, to push her into submission. Miguel spoke cautiously. "Gabrielle, maybe we should consider a temporary leave of absence, just until this blows over." She turned to face him, her expression firm. "Miguel," she said, her voice steady, "if I step down now, I'm admitting guilt. I won't let them win. Not like this." Miguel nodded reluctantly, his respect for her unwavering determination growing. "What's the plan then?" he asked. Gabrielle's answer was immediate. "We face it head on. Full cooperation with the investigation, full transparency with the media, and we double down on our values. And there's one more thing I need to do." The next morning, Gabrielle called Sullivan. His tone was smug as he answered, clearly expecting her to fold under pressure. "What a surprise," he said. "I didn't think you'd call me so soon." "I want to meet," Gabrielle said plainly. "In person." Sullivan's chuckle was low and mocking. "What's the matter, Gabrielle? Finally realizing you're out of your depth?" "Do you want to meet or not?" she asked, her tone leaving no room for argument. An hour later, Gabrielle walked into a small cafe on the outskirts of the city. It was quiet, the kind of place where conversations could happen without interruption. Sullivan was already there, leaning back in his chair with a smug grin plastered across his face. "Bold move coming here," he said as she sat across from him. "I didn't think you had it in you." Gabrielle folded her hands on the table, her expression calm but intense. "Let's skip the games, Peter," she said. "You've done everything you can to destroy me. Fabrications, leaks, bribes. But here's what you don't understand. You can't break me." Sullivan leaned forward, his grin fading slightly. "You think you're untouchable? This industry doesn't care about your speeches or your so-called values. It cares about power, and I have more of it than you ever will." Gabrielle's gaze didn't waver. "Power built on deceit is fragile, Peter. It crumbles the moment people see the truth. And I'm going to make sure they see it." He laughed, though it sounded hollow. "Truth? You think the truth matters in this business? It's about perception, and I've already won that battle. The damage is done." Gabrielle leaned in, her voice low but piercing. "You haven't won anything. All you've done is show the world who you really are. A man so consumed by his ego that he'd burn everything down just to feel important. But here's the thing about fires. They can be extinguished." Sullivan's smirk returned, though it didn't reach his eyes. "You'll regret this," he said, his tone venomous. "You think you can rebuild after what I've done? Think again." Gabrielle stood, her posture unwavering. "I don't need your approval, Peter. I don't need anyone's approval. What I have is the truth, and that's more powerful than anything you'll ever have." She left the cafe without looking back, her strides confident. Outside, the air felt heavier, but Gabrielle breathed deeply, centering herself. She knew the battle wasn't over, but the meeting had only solidified her resolve. That evening, Gabrielle began drafting a plan for a bold media campaign. It wasn't just about defending herself, it was about reclaiming the narrative. She would share her story, not just the successes, but the struggles, the setbacks, and the reasons behind her vision for the company. As she worked late into the night, the weight of the day began to settle. She paused, staring out the window at the city lights below. The fight ahead would be grueling, but she felt ready. "This isn't just about me," she thought. "It's about proving that the right way, the honest way, can win." The conference room buzzed with anticipation as reporters filled every available seat, cameras flashing and microphones angled toward the podium. Gabrielle stood behind the curtain, taking a deep breath. Today wasn't just about clearing her name. It was about reaffirming the values she had built her company on. Moments later, a senior investigator stepped to the podium, holding a stack of papers. "After a thorough and independent investigation," he began, "we have found no evidence to support the claims made against Gabrielle Carter. All allegations were based on fabricated documents provided by parties with malicious intent. Madam Carter has been fully exonerated." A wave of applause broke out, the tension in the room dissipating into murmurs of relief and approval. Gabrielle stepped forward, her posture poised and her face calm. The camera zoomed in as she began to speak. "Thank you," she said, her voice steady. "As I stand here today, I am reminded of a simple truth. The path to justice is never easy, but truth, no matter how long it takes, always finds its way to the light. I am grateful for the process that brought us here, and for the trust that so many of you have placed in me and this company." She paused, her gaze sweeping the room. "This is not just a victory for me. It's a victory for integrity, transparency, and fairness. And it is a reminder of the kind of future we are committed to building, not just as a company, but as an industry." The applause swelled once again as Gabrielle stepped back from the podium, her message resonating with everyone in the room. 2 weeks later, the company's new nationwide campaign, Beyond Luxury, launched with an immediate impact. Billboards across major cities displayed sleek images of luxury cars accompanied by bold text. Luxury isn't just about what you drive, it's about what drives you. Television ads featured heartfelt testimonials from customers who had once felt excluded, but were now part of a community that valued them. One ad showcased a young woman named Sarah, who recounted her experience of being turned away from a showroom in the past. "Today," she said in the ad, "I'm not just a customer. I'm part of something bigger, something that sees me for who I am." In another segment, A middle-aged man named Paul shared how he was finally treated with dignity when visiting a showroom. "They didn't just sell me a car," he said. "They gave me respect." Gabrielle watched the first ads air from her office, a quiet satisfaction settling over her. This wasn't just a campaign, it was a promise to every customer who had ever felt unwelcome. As part of the campaign, Gabrielle made an announcement that surprised even her closest team members. Miguel was officially promoted to manager of the Rodeo Drive showroom and named the spokesperson for Beyond Luxury. At a celebratory press event, Miguel stood on stage, the spotlight shining brightly on him. "This isn't just a title for me," he said, his voice steady. "Madam Carter has taught me to believe in myself, to understand that leadership isn't about power, it's about service. This campaign is our chance to show the world that we're not just a company, we're a movement." Gabrielle smiled from the sidelines, her pride in Miguel evident. He had grown into a leader in his own right, and his words reflected the ethos of the brand she had worked so hard to build. Meanwhile, Sullivan faced a reckoning of his own. Legal authorities had launched an investigation into his actions, uncovering a trail of unethical behavior that extended far beyond his dealings with Gabrielle's company. His former allies began to distance themselves, and a series of subpoenas ensured that Sullivan would face the consequences of his actions. One evening, as Gabrielle reviewed plans for the next phase of the campaign, her phone buzzed with a text. It was from an unknown number. The message read, "You've won, but don't think everyone will follow your lead." Gabrielle stared at the words for a moment before typing her reply. "I don't need everyone to follow me," she wrote. "I just need them to be better than you." She set the phone down, her resolve stronger than ever. Sullivan's bitterness was nothing more than a fading echo of the past she had left behind. On the final day of the campaign's launch week, Gabrielle stood outside the Rodeo Drive showroom. The once bustling showroom now radiated a new energy. Customers of all backgrounds mingled with employees, their shared excitement evident in every interaction. Miguel approached her, his face lit with pride. "The turnout is better than we could have hoped," he said. Gabrielle nodded, her gaze sweeping the crowd. "This is what it's all about," she said. "Not just selling cars, but creating a space where people feel valued." As the sun began to set, casting a warm glow over the scene, Gabrielle allowed herself a rare moment of stillness. A small smile graced her lips as she watched the campaign come to life before her eyes. She knew there was still much work to be done, but this was the start of something bigger than she had ever imagined. The courtroom was filled with an air of solemnity as Peter Sullivan stood before the judge. The gavel's echo had long faded, replaced by the low murmurs of reporters and attendees. Sullivan, once a figure of confidence and power in the luxury auto industry, now appeared diminished. His tailored suit hung loosely on his frame, and his usually sharp demeanor had softened into something closer to desperation. The judge delivered the verdict with finality. "Mr. Sullivan, you are found guilty of libel, conspiracy to commit fraud, and breach of fiduciary duty. The evidence against you is overwhelming. You will face substantial financial penalties and will be barred from holding any executive position in the industry for the foreseeable future." Sullivan's attorney attempted one last appeal, but the courtroom had already moved on. As the proceedings ended, Sullivan's once loyal colleagues avoided his gaze, leaving him to exit the building alone under the glare of flashing cameras. Gabrielle, however, chose not to attend the trial. Her focus wasn't on the man who had tried to tear her down. It was on the future she was determined to build. As she sat in her office that morning, news of Sullivan's conviction played softly on the television in the background. She didn't smile or gloat. Instead, she leaned back in her chair, closed her eyes, and exhaled. Justice had been served, but her work was far from over. In the days that followed, Gabrielle felt a deep weariness settle over her. The battles she had fought, both publicly and privately, had taken a toll. She decided to take a brief leave from the company and return to Atlanta, where her journey had begun. Walking through the familiar streets of her old neighborhood, Gabrielle felt a mixture of nostalgia and peace. She passed the modest house where she had grown up, its weathered facade a stark contrast to the sleek showroom she now oversaw. Memories flooded back, her mother's warm smile, the scent of Sunday dinners, and the nights spent dreaming of a future beyond the limits of her surroundings. Standing in front of the house, she remembered her mother's words. When the world feels too big, start with yourself. Those words had guided her through every challenge, and they resonated now more than ever. Gabrielle closed her eyes, letting the memory fill her with a renewed sense of purpose. Back at the company, the Beyond Luxury campaign was exceeding all expectations. Customers from all walks of life flooded the showrooms, drawn not just by the cars, but by the message of inclusivity and innovation. Stories of exceptional customer service began to circulate, painting a picture of a brand that truly valued its clients. Miguel, now fully confident in his leadership, had transformed the Rodeo Drive showroom into the crown jewel of the company. Under his guidance, the team not only achieved record-breaking sales, but also set a new standard for service that other showrooms sought to emulate. At a company-wide meeting, Miguel addressed the staff, his voice steady and passionate. Madam Carter didn't just teach me how to lead, she taught me how to believe in something bigger than myself. This isn't just a job, it's a chance to make a difference. Gabrielle watched from the back of the room, her heart swelling with pride. Miguel's growth was a testament to the values she had fought so hard to instill in the company. The success of Gabrielle's leadership soon drew national attention. A feature article in the New York Times hailed her as the woman who redefined the luxury auto industry. The piece chronicled her rise from humble beginnings to her groundbreaking achievements, highlighting her unwavering commitment to fairness and innovation. In a follow-up interview, a journalist asked Gabrielle how she felt about being labeled a trailblazer. Her response was characteristically humble. "I didn't change this industry," she said. "I just opened the door for it to change itself." The quote quickly became emblematic of her leadership style, resonating with both her supporters and critics. One evening, as the city lights twinkled below, Gabrielle stood on the rooftop of her company's headquarters. The view was breathtaking, a kaleidoscope of movement and light that seemed to stretch endlessly into the horizon. She allowed herself a moment to pause and reflect. The battles she had fought, the accusations, the betrayals, the relentless pressure had all been worth it. She had not only cleared her name, but had also reshaped her company into something she could truly be proud of. Yet Gabrielle knew this wasn't the end. The path ahead would bring new challenges, but she was ready. As a cool breeze swept across the rooftop, Gabrielle smiled. She wasn't just standing on top of a building. She was standing on the foundation of a legacy she had built with integrity, resilience, and vision. "This is just the beginning," she thought, her gaze fixed on the horizon. And with that, she turned and walked back inside, ready for whatever came next. The sun began to set over Rodeo Drive, casting a warm golden glow on the iconic storefronts and bustling streets. The showroom, now bustling with activity, had been transformed into the heart of a community celebration. Elegant string lights draped across the entrance, and a red carpet welcomed guests from all walks of life. Customers, investors, employees, and even some former staff members gathered, their conversations a harmonious blend of gratitude and optimism. Gabrielle stood near the entrance, observing the lively scene before her. The air was filled with laughter, music, and the aroma of gourmet food from local vendors she had personally invited. This wasn't just an event, it was a celebration of resilience, unity, and the power of standing firm in the face of adversity. As the crowd began to settle, Gabrielle stepped onto the small stage set up in the center of the showroom. The room quieted, all eyes turning to her. She held the microphone confidently, her gaze sweeping across the crowd. "Good evening," she began, her voice calm yet commanding. "Tonight isn't just about celebrating a company. It's about celebrating the people who make it what it is. Success isn't measured by numbers or accolades. It's measured by the values we uphold and the lives we touch." She paused, letting her words settle before continuing. "Our value isn't in the cars we sell. It's in the people we serve, our customers, our employees, and our community. Each of you has been a part of this journey, and for that, I thank you." The audience broke into applause, their admiration for Gabrielle palpable. She smiled, taking a step back to let the moment breathe before continuing. "Together," she said, her voice steady, "we've shown that luxury is more than material. It's about how we treat one another. It's about creating spaces where everyone feels seen and valued." As the evening continued, Miguel took to the stage unexpectedly, microphone in hand. The crowd turned their attention to him, his confidence shining brightly. "If I may," he began, glancing at Gabrielle with a warm smile, "I'd like to say something on behalf of all of us." Gabrielle, caught off guard, smiled softly as Miguel continued. "Madam Carter," he said, "you've taught us all something invaluable. You've shown us that leadership isn't about power, it's about purpose. You believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. You gave me and so many others the opportunity to prove that we are more than what the world expects of us. For that, we're eternally grateful." The room erupted into applause, a wave of emotion washing over Gabrielle. She blinked back tears, her heart swelling with gratitude. Miguel stepped down, his words lingering in the air as Gabrielle embraced him briefly, her voice trembling as she whispered, "Thank you." Later that night, as Gabrielle mingled with the crowd, an assistant handed her an envelope. "This came for you earlier," they said quietly before stepping away. Gabrielle opened the envelope and unfolded a handwritten letter. The elegant script was immediately familiar. It was from an older customer who had witnessed Sullivan's actions during the height of the scandal, but had remained silent. The letter read, "Dear Madam Carter, I owe you an apology. There was a time when I stood silent in the face of injustice, believing it wasn't my place to intervene. But your courage, your unrelenting fight for what is right, has shown me that silence is a choice, and it's the wrong one. You've inspired me to do better, to be better. Thank you for not giving up. Your actions have left an indelible mark on me and many others." Sincerely, Edward Thorne. Gabrielle folded the letter, holding it close for a moment. It was a reminder that her journey wasn't just about the battle she had fought. It was about the ripple effect of her actions on others. As the event came to an end, Gabrielle stepped outside, the cool evening air brushing against her skin. She watched as families, couples, and individuals made their way out of the showroom, their faces alight with joy and hope. Among them, she noticed a young woman in a simple dress, her eyes wide with admiration as she walked past. Gabrielle saw a reflection of her younger self in the woman, full of dreams, determination, and an unyielding belief in a brighter future. The young woman caught Gabrielle's eye and offered a shy wave. Gabrielle returned the gesture, her smile warm and genuine. In that moment, she felt a deep sense of fulfillment. This was what it was all about, creating a legacy that empowered others to dream big and act boldly. As the streets of Rodeo Drive quieted, Gabrielle climbed into her car, the weight of the evening settling into her shoulders. She took one last look at the showroom, its lights shining brightly against the darkening sky. She started the engine but hesitated for a moment, her hands resting on the steering wheel. In the rearview mirror, she caught her own reflection. Her eyes, though tired, sparkled with determination. She spoke softly, as if to herself, but also to the journey that lay ahead. "This isn't the end," she murmured. "It's just the beginning." With that, Gabrielle drove off into the night, the headlights of her car cutting through the darkness as she moved forward, leaving behind not just a showroom, but a legacy of hope, resilience, and change. Her story reminds us that true leadership isn't about titles or power. It's about standing up for what's right, even when the odds are against you. What would you fight for if the stakes were high? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more inspiring stories that challenge the way we see the world.